Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And sorry that we were a couple of minutes late. We're having a couple of technical difficulties there kicking off the live stream. So this evening, I'm joined by Senator Mark Wall. And actually just want to wish Mark's son good luck, who's doing his Leaving Cert this morning. And this evening, we're talking about renewing rural Ireland. And over the last year, we've had a situation where so many of our shops, our local pubs, local businesses have either closed or are under severe financial stress. And on top of that, loads more people are working from home, spending much more time in their local communities. So today, over the last couple of months, we've done our survey, and today we're going to talk about some of the things we've heard from people about the issues around rural Ireland, local towns and villages. And we're going to talk about them fairly briefly, but myself and Mark want to talk about some of the stuff we've heard from people. So I'm going to introduce Mark, and thank you, Mark, for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Owen, and thank you very much for your good wishes to my own son, Cathal, and just obviously to join you in good wishes to all those Leaving Certs who started their exams today. And obviously, we're all anticipating very good weather, as normally happens when the Leaving Cert starts. But a very important topic to be discussed tonight, as you have mentioned. A lot of people have been on to us about what they expect when they come out of this pandemic, and what, more importantly, their communities expect. You mentioned people that were working from home, and they're looking for extra and additional community facilities. And I know throughout the night we're going to be talking about that, and about talking about local issues in Laois and in Kildare, and issues that yourself and myself deal with on a daily basis. So really looking forward to this chat. We have a number of topics, obviously, as you mentioned, from our Labour Party survey that we will discuss during the night, and that's still ongoing. We look forward to discussing those in more detail in the coming months as the results come out. And it's been a very worthwhile survey and very well supported by people in both Laois and Kildare, and even throughout Ireland. There's been some great results. So that will happen over the coming months. So as you say, tonight on, we want to talk about some local issues, some local initiatives that both of us are involved in, and some of the issues that people want to raise again. And people can contact us and ask their questions, and obviously we'll do our very best to answer them here tonight. So looking forward to the chat on. Thanks very much for the invite.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mark. And I suppose there's a couple of issues that are happening at the moment which are causing significant difficulties in Northern Ireland. One is illegal dumping and littering, both of which have exponentially increased in the last few months. They're constantly, it's one of the most constant issues that we deal with. Third one is things like derelict buildings. But for tonight, we talked about this earlier, Mark, and we felt it was important to talk about some of the stuff that's going well as an example for other areas. So the first one I want to talk about was Abbeyleix Bog and the project that they put in place there locally. Because in Abbeyleix Bog, what they've done is, rather than, we've talked a lot about the peatlands and Bord Lamona, there's huge issues where the just transition and that project really didn't work as well as expected. But in Abbeyleix, they've managed to turn that into a tourist opportunity where, you see the colours and the natural environment around Abbeyleix. And every week, the numbers are increasing. There's more and more people coming. Initially, an awful lot of Laois people, when they couldn't leave the county, that was the venue that they were going to. And now, even over the weekend, I heard from a friend from Dublin who had come down, seeing some of the posts about Abbeyleix Bog. So that's just a really simple but really brilliant example of connecting our natural environment, our heritage of bogs, and making it into a tourist area. And I know you wanted to talk about the plans for the Blue Way that's coming up as well, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely, Owen. And you mentioned Abbeyleix, the bog project, and we have one in Umrus just outside Montserrat as well that's in development. And these are really important projects, and you mentioned how people are beginning to get outdoors. And one of the biggest opportunities that have come, throughout South Kildare and into Laois is obviously the Blue Way. Very excited about it. Very opportune for me as well, in the fact that I'm only a couple of 100 yards away from the Blue Way, so I get to walk it almost most days. So that's a brilliant opportunity for me, but it's a brilliant opportunity for all the towns along. And if you walk and start off in the town of Athy, you come to Vicarstown and then on into Montserrat and into Rethinking, and then on up into Ballyteague and Robertstown in Kildare. And it's a terrific opportunity for people, and I'm very excited by this. Owen, there's 46 kilometers of trackway there that people can walk, people can run, people can use their bicycles. And there are a lot of business people who have come to me and to a lot of local representatives about exciting business opportunities. And when we talk about rural villages, we talk about rural towns, we want to look outside the box. We want to look at how we can develop projects, distinct to that town. And the Blue Way is definitely an opportunity for businesses. And some of the projects are absolutely brilliant in their concept, and really looking forward. Some of them have already started. There's some very beautiful coffee shops all along the way now, right from Athy right all the way up. And we got confirmation from the minister last week. He was actually in Athy yesterday looking at the Shackleton Museum, which is another very important project, that the Blue Way will be finished within the end of next year. You know that there's 2 sections of it already finished, which, as you said, are seeing people out walking, and it's a great recreational asset. But we got to look outside as well as for locals. This is a great tourist opportunity for people. And I know throughout Munsterevin and Rethinking, and as I say, back into Vickerstown and tying up as far as Robertstown, there are people looking at these business opportunities, rural business opportunities. And as we come out of this pandemic, and as we look at people working from home and in their communities, this is the opportunities that we want on. So really exciting project. Roughly around 8 million will be invested in this. And this is something that we can all benefit from. There's a piece of this for everybody along that section, all along South Kildare and into Laois.
Yeah, I saw it in Vickerstown myself a few weeks back, and I think just seeing how much enjoyment people were getting out of it, and that's before it's developed. It's just that was just the road that was there, perfect road for cycling. It'll be a great road for the walks, and bike rental, coffee shops, all of those businesses are going to really benefit from that type of development. And I think you look at Abbey Leaks, you look at the Blue Way, and you see there's such great potential to develop tourism in Laois, Kildare, Offaly, in all of this part of the country. And tourism is where we need to put the money in, because with COVID, it's like a reset. It's like, why can't these counties be a tourist hub for this part of the country? Now, we've talked about that as the tourist side of things, Mark, and I think there's other aspects to recreation. Like we look at the sports facilities in our local area. Like in Creddyard, we have St. Albans, we have Creddyard GA, we have Creddyard United, and we have the St. Bridget's Handball Alley. All absolutely fantastic facilities. In Cleshan, the FIFA AstroTurf, and in St. Felix in Greycullen, they're now developing their soccer pitch as well. Excellent facilities. Same in Athy. I know you could list off a rake of sports facilities as well. And I think your plan, which you've talked about previously, is about recreation that people can access that aren't in a formal sports club, that aren't necessarily making that step to be on a team, or don't necessarily want the form structure of a club. So if you have a chance, I'd love to hear more about those plans, Mark, that you've been working on.
Yeah. Thanks, Owen. This is a very unique opportunity, and I think it's an opportunity that the Labour Party are developing, and it will form part of our rural policy and our community policy as well. And that's community playing pitches. I know I've been chasing this down in the town of Athy for a number of years now, and thankfully the county development plan is going through at the moment, and Kildare County Council have included 12.5 acres of community playing pitches for the town of Athy. These are new pitches. These are going to be available to all sports, as you say, and particularly to minority sports. And we have an issue here, Owen, in relation to the local camogie club, who don't actually have their own home. And this particular will benefit the local camogie club and obviously women's sports. So what we're hoping to do is that we can see this rolled out throughout each local authority, that all our major towns and villages, big villages along the road, will actually have community playing pitches funded by the local authority, available to all those sports who maybe cannot afford their own accommodation. And that's an important point. Even you talk about how popular soccer is at the moment, and you mentioned Creddyard, etc. But there are a lot of soccer clubs in the area, right through Strably and right through Vickerstown, and right through Athy, etc., and all into Munsterevin. And particularly in Munsterevin at the moment, I know they're struggling for facilities. They're very welcome facilities at the moment from a local builder, but he may build, there on that particular site at any time. So they're looking for extra playing facilities. So that's what we need here. And that will form a cornerstone of this Labour policy, that we need local authorities to purchase land and develop those for community playing pitches. Because at the end of the day, we all know housing is a huge issue, but if we don't build the community structure zone, then we shouldn't be building the houses, in fairness. And this is a huge issue for me, and I know it is for you as well throughout Laois. So it's something that we will be pushing. It's an exciting project for Athy, but it should be rolled out elsewhere as well.
Yeah, and Mark, I think it's such an opportunity for people that don't necessarily want that competitive environment of fixtures and training. I was never particularly a good footballer, but if you have somewhere that you can just mess around, much more casual structure, it will encourage an awful lot more people. And I think it's also with a little investment, you can add in an awful lot of sports which are often homeless, things like table tennis, chess clubs, things like that, which you can create those permanent outdoor chess facilities for people. You can really make it a hub for people with all different interests, which it complements the sporting structures, which have received quite a bit of investment. They still need a bit more investment, but I think it's about matching that up so that people have other options to be active in their community.
Yeah, absolutely. It is all about investing in communities. As I say, if we're going to develop houses, which we obviously need, we need to develop the infrastructure for communities to flourish as well. And at the moment, there is community deficits right throughout the areas we represent on. And I get them on a daily basis. I know you do too. And we're working with those clubs and those clubs who don't have a home in particular. We need to ensure that they have a home. And you mentioned that. And one of the issues that has come back to us in the early stages of our survey is the lack of indoor facilities for the likes of your table tennis club. You know, we also need to look at this. It's not rocket science. This works in other countries. It works in our neighbour in the UK, where the local authorities are involved in providing these particular infrastructures, and it needs to work in Ireland. We are behind the curve here, but I think with a little bit of investment, as you mentioned, we can provide the facilities and, more importantly, develop communities, and that's what the Labour Party are looking to do. And I know that you're a strong advocate of that.
Yeah. For example, Mark, one of the things that we're working on locally, the handball club in Laois mentioned to me was the old handball alley in Woodville, which was just up the road from me growing up. And you can see it there. It's the old concrete structure, the old traditional way the handball was played. But very simple investment there will create a facility that anybody can rock up and play handball. And it's those kind of simple wins that we could get in communities all over the place, which encourage the variety of sports. It's about creating the variety of activities and sports for people to be able to partake in. So I think that's what we're talking about when it comes to sport and recreation. There's the ones that are almost like tourist facilities, but for people living locally become walks. There's the sport for people that want to be in the formal sporting structure. And then there's the activities for people that just want to make activity part of their day-to-day life. And I think when people aren't commuting an hour and a half each way to work, they have that chance to spend time where, go and play a game with their children, have space to do that and not feel under pressure to be in a formal club. So I think that's that side of it. And I think the other suggestion that you had, Mark, which I think is great potential, is the community gardens, allotments, that kind of work. So you might want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Again, an idea that has come maybe as a result of lockdown. Most importantly, it probably has come as a result of lockdown. A lot of people have rediscovered their gardens. I know I for one am on at the moment. I find myself out there, but it's a great relaxation, great for mental health. And we all know, and I know you more than anyone in your field of work know about mental health and the mental health issues that may arise of coming out of this pandemic. But one of the issues here is in relation to allotments, community gardens and community spaces. And I've been dealing with Community Gardens Ireland in relation to their wishes. And I think, again, it's something we need to look at. I'm going back to the housing issue, and obviously we can talk about that another night, and it's the most important issue that we have. But a lot of houses are being developed in the towns we mentioned, but the facilities are not there. And we should be development, plots of land where people can get out, do a bit of garden, because some of these houses, unfortunately, the actual open air space and the space, the gardens, etc., are not big enough for such. So, by developing this, we're assisting people in their mental health and letting people associate with others as well who have similar interests. And that's all important. And I think one of the huge issues in relation to this is getting people out of their house. Okay, and this is going to be a huge issue. I know we've spoken about this before, because people have been literally locked down for the last year and a half, and they want to get out and they want to explore and they want to start growing things again, and they want to ensure that they can meet people again. And gardening is such a huge asset for people and their mental health that this is an area. So the community garden concept is something that we want to include in our proposal. It's something we're developing at the moment, and in fairness to a number of county councils, they're looking at this at the moment, and including Kildare and I know Laois as well. But the problem with a lot of people in this area is the red tape on that have to go to 3 or 4 different departments within the council in order to get that piece of ground up and running. So what we're looking for is maybe a community development officer just specifically to look at this particular aspect, maybe as well as the community playing fields, but to develop the community aspect of allotments. I think it's a win-win situation for everybody. You know, if you look at the importance and how successful the men's sheds have been, and indeed the women's sheds now that are starting up everywhere, you know, if they were incorporated into a community garden aspect as well, it really is win-win. They do great work, and this is another aspect of that. And even those, and you know this more than anybody, all those who want to be by themselves and have their own little space, it's important that we allow them to do that as well. So again, it's something we're looking at, it's something that we're developing, and every local authority should have an officer that can deal with this, rather than you having to ring 3 or 4 different departments trying to get up and running. So that's something we'll be working on, and I know you have an interest in that as well.
Yeah, and I think it is crucial for people's mental health. It also goes back to that theme of allowing people to be active in different ways. And often people don't necessarily want to get ready, go to a gym. You know, that's a great option if it's there for people. But some people want to be active by working with their hands, working in gardens. The outcomes for the health for people that garden on a regular basis are really excellent. And actually, in the 5 parts of the world where people live longest, garden is a regular part of their day-to-day routine. So I think gardening in general is one of a crucial part of our developing more and more options for people to relax and spend time in their local community. And I do think it's a very good social aspect. It's something that people can talk about, and I think it's a really good project that you've started to work on there, Mark. So thanks for bringing that up this evening, because I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, we'll develop it more on, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, one of the other areas we've talked about for many months, and an area close to my heart, because I worked in the U Cafe in Carlow in Bolt for several years, is the development of U Cafes. Now, there's a difference, and I would know this from experience. There's a difference in youth projects, which are really important and should be really targeted at certain youth groups. You know, making sure that young people that are on the outskirts of society or finding it hard to integrate in with their peers have activities and are able to enjoy life. And that's crucial, important youth work, which needs trained youth workers and loads of investment. But on top of that, there's an important value in having a space for young people to just go without booking, without having an appointment, without having anything, where they can just go in, have a cup of tea, have a slice of toast, play a game of pool with their friends, just a space to hang out that's not on the street, where they have time to hang out with their friends and enjoy it in a safe environment, where there be trained professionals there working with them that can have a chat with them, can talk to them. And I think that U Cafe model, I don't think there should be a town or village in Ireland where there isn't at least some facility for U Cafes. Because when we talk about mental health, Mark, one of the crucial parts of mental health for young people is not being socially isolated and feeling safe and having things to do. U Cafes hit all of those things. So there's the formal mental health, the area I work in, and then there's the informal. And the informal is so important, and it's such a crucial part of development. There was great talk about it in the 80s. There was a good bit of money for it in the 90s and 2000s, but it seems to have moved more towards the formal, structured U projects. And what I'd much prefer to see is the informal U Cafe model being rolled out in every village and every town. And I know, Mark, you've talked about this quite a lot, and you're working on it as well. So what do you think of it?
Yeah, look, I think this is vital to the future. Like, it is so important that we look after our young people, and they've had it hard as much as anybody else in this pandemic as well, Owen. And we're talking tonight about what we would like to see as we come out of this pandemic, and we need more youth facilities, and that's huge. And the U Cafe has got to play its part. We spoke about those who are linked into formal clubs, etc. But there are a lot of young people who are not on, and you deal with them and I deal with them, and they want somewhere where they can meet their friends, as you say, play a game of pool, play their video games, or or just have a chat. And that's all important as well. And I know there's a great one in the town of Athy. There's one being developed in Montreven. I've been actively involved in supporting that over the years. And these are community spaces for young people run by excellent and committed volunteers. And we need to see this rolled out, as you say, in every large village and every large town in our area. And we'll be fighting for this. And again, it'll form part of our policy, because if we're to look at the way Ireland will look, in the next year, in the next couple of years, one most important thing that we must never forget about are our young people. Then we must look after our young people, and we must look after their mental health. And again, I'm referring to your day-to-day job. And we've spoken about this in the past in relation to the mental health of our young people, because they are our future. And we need to look at youth cafes, youth spaces. Yeah, the youth projects you mentioned, and I'm aware of so many of them throughout South Kildare and into Laois as well, that do fantastic work. But just to have that space that you say you can walk down the town or get dropped off by your parents in the village, etc., and you can walk in, meet your friends, sit down, have a chat for an hour and a half, or whatever else, and then head on back home. And it also, and I'm going to say this, and maybe, it's an issue that we can come back to as well. It reduces the dependency that we've had so often in relation to the pub culture that's here in Ireland as well. On we all don't need to go to pubs. In fairness, that has been a culture that we have had before, because there's been no other opportunities for our young people. So that's what we want to create. We want to create opportunities for our young people. We just want to make sure that they have the facilities. And I know we're going to touch on this very shortly, Owen, because we've already spoken about it and have spoken about it for a while. There's a lot of derelict buildings in our towns and in our villages. These can be our youth spaces, and we need to develop them.
Yeah, and it's interesting what you say about pub culture, Mark, because back 10 years ago, that was the problem that we identified as youth workers when I was working in Great Cullen, is that for youth bands, for young people who are interested in music, the only opportunity they had in Carlow-Town at that time was to play in pubs locally, even though most of them were 17, 18, or turning 18 at best. Yeah. So we developed the space, and eventually we got funded from the Arts Council, where every Friday they could book in, the friends could come listen to the music, they could play whatever music they want. And it was really successful, but it wasn't a very formal structure. They presented the structure, and it's just about developing the opportunities to have a difference than just going to the pub. I saw the scenes in Dublin, and you hear people say, just get bins. But if just get bins was a solution, that would be a much easier world to live in. So to me, I think it's about creating multiple opportunities for people with different interests, and embracing the fact that people have very different interests.
Yeah.
So I think we should touch on those issues that you brought up there, Mark. One is the derelict buildings, and I don't think we need to get into too much detail. There's some of these issues that are just so multifaceted, but there's been the issue in Portarlington for years with the old AIB building, which is an eyesore on Main Street, has been for many, many years. And it's the same. So there's the buildings that are on the main streets for our towns, which bring down the look of the towns and the main streets, to make it a less appealing place to be. And then when you look into housing, there's the houses that are empty, there's sites that aren't being built on, that are owned. All of that work has to be tackled. To make spaces where people want to live in, we have to tackle all of those issues. And really, you shouldn't be able to sit on a derelict site or on a site that's half empty or falling apart. That day has to end if we want to develop new type of towns and new ways for people to live. And I know that's something that we've talked on. It's an issue a bit broader than our meeting this evening, Mark, but it's definitely a major issue, particularly in Portarlington.
Yeah, and it's an issue, you mentioned Portarlington, and I'm obviously aware of that, but it's an issue in all the towns that I deal with as well, Owen, and indeed their villages. And, some of these properties are derelict and indeed vacant for an awful long time. And we spoke about community facilities, and some of these properties are in the middle of the town. And unfortunately, the town centre has died over a period of time as well. So by creating a youth facility, a youth cafe in the middle, like they're doing in Montreven, it's bringing life back into the middle of that particular town. But we can also put other community groups in here. I know on Duke Street in Athy, I was involved with the O&E, the Army ex-military personnel, who have now developed a unit there, an ex-derelict building or vacant building, and they've brought life back into that building. And there are plenty of community groups. I spoke to a director of services in Kildare County Council a number of years ago in relation to what we should see in those derelict buildings. Of course, we need to ensure that they're available to community groups who can pay rent, have memberships, etc., and who can pay rent, but most importantly can bring life back to those buildings. And then you touched on again the issue in relation that we need to bring life back in as regards housing and ensuring that people can actually live in these buildings as well. Because, you know, as we drive through all our towns in the area of South Kildare and Laois, we will find them on all our streets. They're there, unfortunately. But if we recreate those and do them up, and in fairness, we can do that with very little money as well, which has to be said, then we can bring people back into those town centres and make them safe for people again, but most importantly, present them to people and ensure that, you know, when you drive through there, you see life. And that's what we want to see in our towns and villages. We want to see people living their best lives in these towns and villages, you know, and it's an important issue for us.
Yeah, and Mark, you know, when you talk about housing, I saw one of the comments on Facebook was a question about planning permission and the changes. And I do think that we need to come back, do another meeting where we just talk about housing, because it's such a broad issue. But I think the summary of it is we want people living in the local area. If they choose to live in their local area, that's what we want. Now, I initially changed parish from Doonann to Collection, which who knew there would result in me being locked out of my own hometown for about 6 months of the last year. But I think that people want to live locally. An awful lot of people, about the stats are about 60 to 70% of people want to live locally. And I think that should be encouraged as much as possible with the sustainable transport that we'll come to later on in this meeting. But I think the issue of housing is so broad that I really would like to come back to it on another day. And the other issue, Mark, that we both know is constant and constant pain in the head for everybody that's dealing with any kind of community work at the moment is the issue of dumping and the issue of littering. I think it is becoming out of control. There's a cultural change with litter in this country, where before the litter was like a very small number did it, whereas now more and more there's litter. Like you see Flesh and Waterworks, there's litter on it. There's litter on the pitch last week, you know, and then on top of that, there's dumping, which is full household waste, industrial waste, construction waste, being dumped in farms, constantly in Woodfield, constantly in Rossmore, constantly in Flesh. It's a very broad issue. I know you brought in a bill on CCTV, which is one part of it, Mark, but probably beyond our scope this evening. But what do you think about that issue?
Yeah, look, we have to stop dumping in our countryside for various reasons. It's environmental terrorism as far as I'm concerned. There's no other description for it. You know, I get so much contact from our farmers who are so important to rural Laois and rural Kildare that people are just dumping over their hedgerows, and they're then become responsible for it, which is the law at the moment. You know, and they are really crying out for help in relation to this. And then also we mentioned our bogs in your introduction, and unfortunately our bogs are completely destroyed in a lot of places at the moment, with dumping on an industrial scale almost. And we cannot continue this. And the bill that I introduced into the Shannon would allow CCTV cameras to be used by our local authorities. And these are only for people who are going out to dump professionally in most cases. And that's who we need to stop on. And we need to stop them very quickly. Yes, we do need a sea change in people's thinking. You are right in relation to that. But first of all, we need to stop this industrial dumping. So those bogs and those lovely rural places like Wolf Hill that you mentioned and you're from, etc., and all around, you know, Athy, where I'm from, that we take great pride in. And I suppose we should also mention as well the great volunteers that go out, you know, on the weekends and are actually cleaning up after these people. Without them, we would be completely lost. So there's an issue here. We need to see change in people's thinking, but we also need to tackle those industrial dumpers and make sure that they're caught and make sure that there's no scope for them to carry out the large scale dumping that they're doing, because they're ruining the countryside for the rest of us.
Yeah.
And I know we're proud rural people and we live in rural Laois and rural Kildare, but this goes for the town people as well. And I think for those that live in towns and villages, since they started coming out and walking in the rural areas around their towns, they've seen this more and more. I know I've been contacted by a lot more people, you know, since people started walking around. They're seeing this and they want to combat it, and they want to combat it quickly. And, you know, I think everybody is on the same page. It's a very, very small few people doing this, and we need to isolate them. And we need to protect our countryside for so many reasons, because it's beautiful, and we need to ensure that the next generation get to enjoy it like you and me did, Owen. And that for me is a must, you know.
Yeah, and I think if we don't tackle it, all of the other work, all the work at the towns, all the work developing town centres, all of it gets hindered or stopped. Because how long are people going to keep volunteering for a tidy town group? Where the example I have this evening was Port Arlington Tidy Towns put up this evening that they planted flowers in the town, and the flowers are all stolen, not actually even dumped, stolen. And you kind of think they're amazing volunteers. But there's a certain point where we need to stop that type of antisocial behavior. Otherwise, people just aren't going to volunteer in their local community.
Absolutely, you're
and
right.
then it's just, what are we going to have? You know, we need to tackle it on multiple different ways.
Yes.
Again, it's a very broad issue, probably beyond the scope this evening. But I think the work you've done on CCTV is great, Mark. And I think it's just, again, it's trying to stop that industrial type waste. That's the big one. And then the littering, I think there's a cultural change that needs to happen.
Agree.
Yeah. So, Mark, they're the main issues that we've been brought to our attention recently. Now, I suppose the theme I would have, and the thing that I would look at taking a step back on it, is that we want to create towns where there's multiple opportunities for people to spend their time. And that's good for everybody. It's good for their health, it's good for the social aspect, and it's also good for businesses. More footfall in towns, the better for the businesses. I think one of the things that we need to discuss is, how do people get to the towns? I think far too many people feel they need to drive into town centres. I think the whole structure is based on driving. There's a lot of people that can't drive for various reasons. The public transport is just not there, not existent. There's just not enough buses. Like when I was growing up, there was a bus from Newtown to Carlow, much more regular than there is now. There's very limited public transport. And also we felt a bit safer cycling on some of the roads than you would now for younger children or teenagers. And until people feel safe cycling becomes a much more like an exercise type hobby rather than an active transport option. And that is the difference. And you look at the number of, I think it's something like less than 1 in 300 girls cycle to school. And you know, the benefits for young people if they can cycle safely to their school, the health benefits, that kick of energy in the morning, but also their independence. They don't need their parents necessarily, you know, for teenagers, particularly if they're older, don't necessarily need, they're able to do it themselves and look after themselves if it's safe and if the infrastructure is there. It's a better option for most people most of the time. But that structure has really disappeared. Cycling infrastructure is very poor. I know if you go into Greg Cullen, you see the cycle lane up to St. Felix School. It's this very, very narrow little cycle path. It's a huge number of cars each way. Same in Collection outside my house here every morning. There's a huge number of cars going to the school. Very little cycling, even though the actual pathway to the school could easily facilitate cycling. So that's been a major issue. That lack of cycling and the limited public transport are two major issues. When you're talking about development towns, you need to have active transport and public transport that should be really cheap or free.
Yeah, it's a very important point, Owen. And only today I was actually dealing with public transport in relation to the town of Castledermot, which is obviously on the Carlow border. And one of the important aspects that we can tackle with this, and we need to tackle this, is rural links. And in Kildare and Owen Leash as well, we have a fantastic rural link network and the bus network in relation to that. But we have a problem in relation to funding of that at the moment from the Castledermot side. There's a proposal sitting on the Minister's desk in relation to bringing commuter traffic from Carlow through Castledermot into Ballytor, right away into Narramore, Calverstown, 2 Mile House, and into the capital town or county town of Kildare, that is Naas. But that's sitting on the Minister's desk. If we're to be realistic about sustainability, realistic about growing communities and keeping cars off a road, that needs to come off his desk and be put into action. We've seen a brilliant rural transport initiative here from the town of Athy, which goes right through the left-hand side, if we can call it that, of County Kildare, and goes through Kildangan into Nurney, into Kildare town, and right back into Newbridge. And the numbers on that are absolutely terrific. You know, it gets people to work, it gets people to school, it gets people to recreation, to shopping, etc. And it is absolutely brilliant and it's working. So we need to see this rolled out, as you say, into all these rural villages and rural towns. It's all about sustainability. If we want people to live in villages and towns, then we have to provide the rural transport. We have to improve the transport links and the buses. And just to mention, I suppose, as well as rail transport, which is obviously very important for people living in Port Tarrington, Munsterevin, and, you know, all the way from Athy on one side up into Kildare town and Newbridge as well. Like, we have an issue at the moment where the fares, people are actually traveling from Newbridge, the large town of Newbridge, to Sallins, because they're saving themselves €150 a month, and they're parking in Sallins train station to get the cheaper fare into Dublin. Now, I've raised this on a number of occasions. We have petitions, etc., that we were going back to again, because I only recently raised it once again with the Minister for Transport. So this is about sustainable transport. It's about ensuring that the public transport is used, most importantly. You mentioned free transport. I know the Transport Committee in the Oireachtas are looking at this at the moment. We see it working in Luxembourg and other countries. We must look at this. This is our future.
Yep.
We have got to take as many cars off the road, but in taking the cars off the road, we have to provide the cycle lanes, which you actually say, but we also have to provide the public transport. And it can work. It is working. It is working in rural towns at the moment, and all it needs is a bit of government support. I'll be pushing for that. I know you are as well. And we need to keep pushing for this, because that will form a cornerstone of our policy. There must be linkage between these villages in order for people to get around, to visit families, to go to work, for recreation. And it's cornerstone to any development and the future of our rural towns and villages.
Mark, you talk about that. I look at it in a way that says the easier option should be the more sustainable one, and should be the greener one for people. And at the moment, the car beats on every measure is easier. Because if I want to go to Dublin, for example, if I go to the train station, which obviously with COVID, the numbers are limited at the moment anyway, but say on a normal time, if I go to the train station, there's a €4 charge to park in the car park. So each time you're discouraging it. So you might as well pay that on the far side of it and go at the time you want to go.
Exactly.
So that should be free. And the train should be it's a semi-state train company, should be subsidized, and there should be far, far more trains out there. You look at that map, it's an embarrassment to the country that you look at the map 100 years ago to the rail network that was in this country, and you look at it now, and it's Donegal, it hasn't even got a train in the whole county. It's an embarrassment. And obviously rail transport has been really important for people in our two areas, because they have used it as a commuter. It's quite good in that sense, but there should be far more options on rail. Yeah. And I think on buses, we've seen some really good initiatives lately. Portlaoise being a carbon neutral town. First electric bus, Carl will show a picture of it there. The first electric bus in Ireland, which is really good. It has numerous benefits. The most important one being the lack of air pollution. And air pollution, people talk about climate change. Even if you just ignore climate change, the importance of climate change for a minute, the air pollution in towns is actually a major issue. And the air pollution outside schools is higher than most places in most towns, because people drive diesel cars, and a diesel car idling is nothing but fumes. So what we need to have is different transport options. Electric buses is a great example, but also I think the move eventually will be synthetic petroleum, some of the work that's been taking place in Trinity, because there's an awful lot of vehicles that are not going to become battery operated. The planes aren't going to tractors, lorries, very unlikely with lorries, tractors aren't. And I think that there's options that can be cleaner than diesel and petrol, because they really do damage the lungs, and they're not great for public health. But the interesting thing is, if you just look at schools, and the schools that we know locally, most of the solutions don't need any new technology. It's walking and it's cycling, because the vast majority of people live within 1 or 2 kilometers, could easily cycle and walk if the infrastructure that already exists was put in place. Yes. But at the moment, it is car-based culture. Drive the car to the school, sit the car outside, fumes up in the air. The few children are walking are exposed to it. We need to change the culture around how people get transport in the towns. And that makes the town much more pleasant for people to spend time in, because it's cleaner and the air quality is much, much better. So I think so once we look at how people get into towns, and then we also look at what to do when they get there, they're the two major themes that I would look at. I think we've both known local businesses that were great. You look at 12 Acres, you look at Ballycavan in Stradbally, you look at all these great companies, and I think there's great potential for them. I think it would be good for young people to realize, I suppose, that there is potential for it, and encourage even younger people to take the risk and to realize that they can use their ideas, and that there is a great future there in small businesses. And it would be great for local work, and also keep people living where they want to live.
Yeah. And you're right, as you say, Ballycavan and 12 Acres, ideal opportunities that they have provided, you know, locally and in rural, between Stradley and Castle Mitchell here, you know, in relation where Ballyclacabin is, and it's absolutely brilliant to see, you know, the growth of that particular company, and that's what we need to do. And the local Leo offices in Kildare and Laois play a very vital role in this, Owen, and should be developed even more, you know. And if anybody has an idea there, as you say, it is very important that they contact one of us, and we will help them and assist them as best we can. And Leo offices in both counties, in both local authorities, are very active. They're brilliant. I deal with them, and they're very good in encouraging people. And as you say, what we want now is we want people to live where they want to live. And that's, I think, is going to be the biggest issue in relation to this, as I said, coming out of this pandemic, that people will want to live in the rural settings where they grow up. A lot of people don't want to go to the big cities anymore, you know, and that's going to be huge for us. It's going to be huge how we tackle that, how we develop the towns and ensure that the towns can cope with that, which is a very important aspect as well. I know we're going to come back to housing again, but just, I suppose, to finish on the housing point of view, is that we have created a housing estates in many of the towns and villages that we've mentioned here tonight, but we're still trying to catch up on the infrastructure that we've spoken about. And we have to get to the point where the infrastructure comes first, the cycle lanes come first, the schools. Like, how long are we waiting in Monster? Thankfully, we've seen the new school being built. We're waiting for one in Portarlington at the moment, an extension secondary school in Portarlington and in other areas. Thankfully, you know, we're getting extensions in other areas, but that is catch up. We need to plan for the future, and in planning for the future, the infrastructure has to come first. We need the youth facilities, we need the playing facilities, you know, we need the community gardens to a certain extent, and then we can build the houses, you know, in fairness, because, you know, there is a housing crisis, and we are going to come back to this, but it's no use putting so many people into one town or to one village and then asking them to make their own way through the car or through public transport, which is non-existent in most aspects. So that's something we need to develop, build these opportunities for everybody, and we can build these sustainable communities that we talked about tonight.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, when you take a step back and you realize that actually the culture that had developed, say, from the mid-80s till the right before the pandemic, was actually the exception to the rule. That prior to that, most people lived close to where they worked.
Yes.
So the shopkeeper would live above the shop, and the farmer still lived near their farms, and the worker would live near the factory. You know, like in the Swan, there was the Fleming's factory that my father worked in. And, you know, people lived near to where they worked. And in the 80s, they got this idea that because of the price of housing increasing in cities, that you could expand out, that the commute could become acceptable. And actually, when you look at it, the commute isn't acceptable. It just doesn't make sense for people to travel 2 to 3 hours each day, going away from their communities. And what we need to do now, especially with technology changing, the technology has actually improved so much from the 80s, 90s, that you can do the hubs that you have in Portarlington, in Mount Mellick, where people can work remotely, but we can also build the types of jobs, manufacturing, tourism locally, so people don't have to go anywhere. And I think that's the crucial work that we're trying to get to, is not just improving the quality of work, which is the core work of our party, but also improving the lifestyle that facilitates the work. Because the labor movement originally, when it started, was first, we're the reason that there's a weekend. We're also the reason there's an 8-day, and the 8-hour workday was based on the idea that there was 8 hours of rest, 8 hours of sleep, and 8 hours of work. And the 8 hours of rest in the last couple of decades had become so caught up in traffic and commuting and limiting people that we really need to rethink things. And I think tonight has been a good conversation. We've had these conversations on and off throughout many, many months, Mark. But I'd really encourage people to send us an email, send us a message. If you have an idea, a suggestion, send it out to us. And we read everything. We really do think about everything. We really value the survey responses. So I'm really asking people to get in touch and give us the suggestions. And guarantee that we will follow up. If it's a good idea, we'll do the work, and we'll try to get it as much as possible, because we're trying to work with people to make things a little bit better around where we live. So thanks to everybody that's joined us, and thanks for everybody that stayed with our meeting. I'll read the Facebook comments and things like that afterwards. But thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks, Mark, for taking the time out.
Thanks, Owen. Really
enjoyed it.
Busy week for you and
your family, so thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Owen. Thank you.
Thank you.